My name is Darrel, and I'm 58 years old. For 32 years, I believed I understood what family meant. I thought the bond between a father and son was unbreakable, especially when tragedy strikes. My wife, Sarah, had just passed away after a long battle with leukemia, and I was preparing to make the hardest phone call of my life. I genuinely believed that in our darkest hour, family would come together. I thought my son would rush home to help me navigate the impossible task of burying the woman who gave him life. But sometimes the people closest to us can surprise us in the worst possible way. Before we dive into this story that changed everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty, I want to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Your support means the world to me. So please hit that like button and subscribe if these real-life stories resonate with your heart. This tale might be difficult to hear, but it leads somewhere beautiful that I think you need to witness. I met Sarah when we were both 19 at Ohio State University. She was studying education, and I was in my second year of business. We were both small-town kids, trying to make sense of the big city. Sarah grew up in Lancaster, a quiet farming community, 30 miles south of Columbus. I was from even smaller Circleville, where everybody knew everybody's business by Sunday morning church service. Our first date was at a little diner off campus called Murphy's. Sarah ordered apple pie and coffee, and I was so nervous I could barely touch my burger. She had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. When she laughed at my terrible jokes about construction, I knew I wanted to spend my whole life making her smile like that. We got married right after graduation in the spring of '85. The ceremony was in her childhood church, with about 60 people from both our families. Sarah wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her petite frame. I wore my father's best suit, pressed and cleaned for the occasion. We had exactly $200 between us, and dreams bigger than the state of Ohio. Those first years were harder than either of us expected. I started working for a local construction company, pulling 12-hour days framing houses in new developments, springing up around Columbus. Sarah took a teaching position at the elementary school in Lancaster, driving 40 minutes each way, because it was the only job available. We lived in a tiny apartment above Mrs. Henderson's garage, sharing one bathroom and a kitchen the size of most people's closets. Sarah had 3 miscarriages during our first 5 years of marriage. Each loss broke something inside both of us, but she never gave up hope. She would sit by the window in our little living room, reading baby books and marking pages with recipes for homemade baby food. I would find her sometimes just staring at the empty second bedroom we had hopefully set up as a nursery. In 1992, when Sarah was 31 and I was 33, Marcus was born. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Sarah spent the last 3 months on bed rest, and I thought we might lose both of them during delivery. But when that little boy finally arrived, screaming and healthy, at 7 pounds 4 ounces, Sarah looked at me and said, this was worth every moment of waiting. Marcus was our miracle child. Sarah poured every ounce of love she had stored up during those painful waiting years into raising him. She read to him every night, helped with homework at the kitchen table, and never missed a baseball game or school concert. I worked longer hours to provide everything I thought our family deserved, often missing dinner, but always making sure Sarah never had to worry about money. We started taking Marcus camping every summer at Salt Fork State Park. Those were some of the happiest days of our marriage. Sarah would pack elaborate picnic baskets, and Marcus would spend hours catching minnows in the shallow creek, while I taught him to whittle with my grandfather's pocket knife. We would sit around the campfire at night roasting marshmallows and telling stories until Marcus fell asleep in his mother's lap. By the time Marcus was in high school, our construction business had grown into something substantial. I had 5 crews working steady, and Sarah had been promoted to assistant principal. Marcus was smart as a whip, making honor roll every semester and playing varsity baseball. College scholarships started arriving during his senior year, and we were bursting with pride. Marcus chose Northwestern University for business school, and we supported his decision completely. It was expensive, but Sarah and I had saved every extra dollar for his education. We drove him up to Chicago that first fall, helping him move into his dorm room, while Sarah cried happy tears in the parking lot. The visits home became less frequent as Marcus got deeper into his studies and internships. He started spending holidays with roommates' families in places like Connecticut and California. Sarah understood, or at least she said she did. She would send care packages every month, filled with his favorite homemade cookies and handwritten notes about what was happening back home. After graduation, Marcus landed a job with a consulting firm in Manhattan. The salary was more than Sarah and I made together, and we couldn't have been prouder. He found an apartment in Brooklyn, and his phone calls home dwindled to quick check-ins every few weeks. Sarah would hang up from these brief conversations and spend the rest of the evening unusually quiet. I told myself this was natural. Young people needed to build their own lives, establish independence, prove themselves in competitive careers. Sarah agreed when I said these things, but I started noticing how she would linger by the phone on Sunday evenings, hoping it might ring. 2 years ago, Sarah began experiencing fatigue that she couldn't explain. At first, we attributed it to her demanding job and the stress of Marcus being so far away. She started taking afternoon naps, something she had never done in all our years together. She would come home from school exhausted, barely able to make dinner. The bruising started appearing around the same time. Purple marks on her arms and legs that she couldn't remember getting. When I asked about them, she would laugh and say she must be getting clumsy in her old age. But I noticed how she started wearing long sleeves, even during warm weather, how she avoided hugging too tightly because it seemed to hurt. Sarah finally agreed to see Dr. Martinez when she started having trouble remembering things at work. Names of students she had taught for years, meeting times where she had parked the car. The initial blood tests came back with numbers that made Dr. Martinez's face grow serious. He referred us to an oncologist in Columbus, Dr. Patricia Webb, who had experience with blood disorders. The word leukemia hit us like a physical blow. Dr. Webb explained that Sarah had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, an aggressive form that required immediate treatment. The survival statistics were better for younger patients, but Sarah was 57, and her particular markers indicated a challenging road ahead. Sarah made me promise not to tell Marcus immediately. She didn't want him worrying about something he couldn't control from so far away. She said we would wait until we understood the treatment plan, until we had reason to be optimistic. I agreed, though every fiber of my being wanted to call our son and bring him home. The chemotherapy began in early spring. Sarah approached it with characteristic determination, researching every aspect of her treatment and maintaining detailed notes about side effects and medications. She continued teaching as long as possible, wearing scarves and hats when her hair began thinning, never once complaining about the nausea or bone-deep fatigue. I rearranged my work schedule to drive her to appointments. The construction business was stable enough that I could delegate daily operations to my foreman, Jake, who had been with me for 15 years. Sarah hated feeling like a burden, so I presented it as wanting to spend more time together rather than acknowledging how much she needed the help. Our phone calls with Marcus continued, as if nothing had changed. Sarah would put on makeup before these conversations, even though they were just audio calls, as if somehow her appearance might affect her voice. She would ask about his work projects and dating life, sharing news about neighbors and her garden club activities. Marcus never seemed to notice that these calls were shorter than before, or that his mother's voice sounded strained. I started lying awake at night, listening to Sarah's labored breathing, counting the hours between her medications. The master bedroom became a makeshift medical station, with pill organizers, oxygen equipment, and notebooks tracking symptoms. Sarah insisted on maintaining her flower beds, even when she could barely walk to the mailbox, directing me through the planting and weeding. She could no longer manage herself. The worst part was watching her try to maintain normalcy during our increasingly rare social activities. Her garden club friends began visiting more frequently, bringing casseroles and offering to drive her places. Sarah would rally for these visits, applying lipstick and sitting in her favorite chair by the window, discussing upcoming fundraisers and community events as if she would be around to participate. Dr. Webb adjusted the treatment protocol 3 times during the summer. Each change brought temporary hope, followed by devastating setbacks. Sarah's white cell count would improve for a few weeks, giving us reason to believe we were winning the battle. Then new symptoms would appear. Tests would reveal resistance to medications, and we would start over with more aggressive approaches. I remember one particularly difficult evening in late August. Sarah had been vomiting for hours after her latest round of chemotherapy. She was so weak she couldn't lift her head from the pillow, and I felt completely helpless watching her suffer. When she finally fell asleep around midnight, I sat on our back porch and called Marcus. He answered after several rings, sounding distracted. Background noise suggested he was at some kind of social event. I started to tell him about his mother's condition, but the words caught in my throat. Sarah had made me promise to wait for the right time, and this clearly wasn't it. Instead, I asked about his work and listened to him describe a new project with international clients. By October, it became clear that aggressive treatment was causing more suffering than healing. Dr. Webb suggested transitioning to comfort care, focusing on quality of life rather than fighting the disease. Sarah made this decision with typical grace, saying she preferred to spend her remaining time at home rather than in hospital rooms. Those final weeks were precious in ways I couldn't have imagined. Sarah organized photo albums, wrote letters to friends, and spent hours in the garden, even when walking required tremendous effort. She talked about Marcus constantly sharing memories of his childhood and expressing pride in the man he had become. She never mentioned feeling hurt by his absence during her illness. Sarah's last good day was a Tuesday in early November. She managed to make pancakes for breakfast, something she hadn't done in months. We sat at the kitchen table, watching cardinals at the bird feeder, and she told me how grateful she was for our life together. She said she had no regrets, except wishing she could see Marcus settled with a family of his own. That night, Sarah's breathing became labored and irregular. I called hospice, and the nurse confirmed what I already knew. Sarah passed away quietly at 4:37 in the morning on November 14th, holding my hand and whispering that she loved me more than all the stars in the sky. Her last words were about how proud she was of the family we had built together. The immediate aftermath of losing Sarah felt like drowning in slow motion. I sat beside her body for nearly an hour, unable to accept that she was really gone. The hospice nurse was gentle but insistent about the necessary procedures. Phone calls had to be made, arrangements had to be started, and the machinery of death had to begin turning. My first call was to Dr. Webb's office, then to the funeral home we had selected months earlier, during Sarah's more lucid moments. She had specific wishes about everything: the music, the flowers, even the dress she wanted to wear. I found the folder where she had written these instructions, in her careful handwriting, her thoughts about her own memorial service, planned with the same attention to detail she brought to everything else. The response from our community was overwhelming. Within hours of the funeral home posting Sarah's obituary online, our phone began ringing constantly. Her garden club friends organized meal deliveries. Neighbors showed up with flowers and offers to help with anything I needed. Former students, now adults with children of their own, shared memories of how Mrs. Sarah had influenced their lives. I found myself managing logistics that felt surreal, choosing between different casket options, deciding on flower arrangements, reviewing the order of service with Pastor Williams. Sarah should have been making these decisions with me, offering her opinions about whether the pink roses or white lilies would be more appropriate. Instead, I stumbled through choices that felt impossibly important and completely meaningless at the same time. Writing Sarah's obituary was perhaps the most difficult task. How do you capture 32 years of marriage, 25 years of teaching, countless community contributions, and immeasurable love in a few paragraphs? I sat at our kitchen table with her photo propped beside my laptop, trying to find words worthy of the woman who had been my entire world. The obituary mentioned Sarah's dedication to education, her love of gardening, her involvement with local charities, and her devotion to family. I wrote about her strength during illness and her grace in facing death. I struggled with how to describe Marcus ultimately settling on beloved son without mentioning his absence during her final months. I scheduled the funeral for Thursday, assuming Marcus would need time to arrange travel from New York. I contacted my brother Tom in Michigan, Sarah's sister Linda in Kentucky, and began making arrangements for out-of-town relatives. The funeral home suggested ordering extra chairs, anticipating a large crowd based on the community response already evident. As Wednesday evening approached, I realized I could no longer postpone the most important phone call. Marcus needed to know that his mother had died. He needed to know about the funeral. He needed the opportunity to grieve and say goodbye. I assumed he would be on the next flight home, that we would navigate this tragedy together, as father and son should. I kept rehearsing the conversation in my head, trying to find gentle words to deliver devastating news. I imagined Marcus crying, asking questions about her final days, expressing regret about not visiting more often. I pictured him taking charge of some funeral arrangements, standing beside me as we greeted mourners, sharing memories about his mother during the service. The weight of grief and logistics was crushing me, but I held on to the belief that calling Marcus would provide some relief. Finally, I wouldn't be carrying this burden alone. My son would come home, and together we would honor Sarah's memory and begin the long process of healing. I had no idea that the phone call I was about to make would shatter what remained of my world. It was 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening when I finally gathered the courage to dial Marcus's number. I was sitting in our bedroom, surrounded by Sarah's belongings that I couldn't bear to disturb. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand beside a book she would never finish. Her favorite cardigan hung over the chair where she used to sit brushing her hair each morning. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my contacts to find Marcus's number. We hadn't spoken in almost 3 weeks, which wasn't unusual anymore. Our last conversation had been brief, with Marcus distracted by work deadlines and me hesitant to burden him with updates about his mother's declining condition. The phone rang 4 times before Marcus answered. Immediately, I could hear background noise that sounded like a busy restaurant or bar. Voices, laughter, clinking glasses, and music created a soundtrack that felt completely wrong for the conversation I needed to have. "Hi, Dad," Marcus said, his voice carrying the slightly impatient tone I had grown accustomed to during our recent calls. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Son, I need to tell you something difficult. Something very important." There was a pause, but not the concerned silence I expected. Instead, I heard Marcus exhale in what sounded like frustration. "Dad, can this wait? I'm at a client dinner right now. This is really not a good time to talk." The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow, but I pressed forward. This news couldn't wait, regardless of his schedule. "Marcus, your mother passed away this morning?" The silence that followed was long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his response shattered every assumption I had about my son's character. "Dad, stop being so dramatic," he said, his voice sharp with irritation. "Mom's fine. You called me just last week with some health scare that turned out to be nothing. You're always catastrophizing everything." I felt my chest tighten, as if someone was squeezing the air from my lungs. "Marcus, I'm not being dramatic. Your mother died at 4:37 this morning. I was holding her hand when she passed. This is exactly why I don't call more often." Marcus continued, his voice rising slightly. "You turn every little thing into some major crisis. Mom probably has a cold or something, and you're acting like it's the end of the world." The cruelty of his words was incomprehensible. I found myself gripping the phone tighter, my voice becoming more urgent. "Son, I'm at the funeral home right now making arrangements. The service is tomorrow at 2:00 at First Methodist. Your mother is gone." But Marcus wasn't listening, or he was choosing not to hear what I was telling him. His response revealed a level of callousness I never could have imagined from the boy Sarah and I had raised with such love and care. "I'm hanging up now," he said with cold finality. "Call me back when you're ready to have a normal conversation instead of whatever this drama is supposed to be." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in complete disbelief. I called back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again 5 minutes later with the same result. Marcus had not only dismissed the news of his mother's death, but had actively blocked further communication. I sat in that bedroom for over an hour, replaying the conversation and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The son Sarah and I had devoted our lives to raising, had responded to news of her death with annoyance and accusation. The boy who had once fallen asleep in his mother's arms around campfires had hung up on his father during the darkest moment of both our lives. The devastation was complete. In the span of one day, I had lost both my wife and my son. Sarah was gone forever, and Marcus had revealed himself to be someone I didn't recognize. The family I thought we had built was an illusion, and I was completely alone in my grief. The morning after that devastating phone call, I woke up hoping the previous day had been a nightmare. But Sarah's empty side of the bed and the silence of our house confirmed the harsh reality. She was gone. Marcus had abandoned me in my darkest hour, and I had a funeral to finalize alone. My phone had remained silent throughout the night. No callback from Marcus, no apology, no acknowledgement that his mother had actually died. I checked my email and text messages repeatedly, finding nothing. The son I thought I knew had simply disappeared when I needed him most. I made the decision that would change everything. I would proceed with Sarah's funeral without Marcus. If he wanted to treat his mother's death as drama, then he would miss the opportunity to say goodbye. I removed his name from the pallbearer list and asked my neighbor Bob to fill the spot instead. The response from everyone else was overwhelming. Tom arrived from Michigan by 10 o'clock, taking charge of details I was too numb to handle. He picked up relatives from the airport, coordinated with the catering company, and fielded phone calls from people wanting to help. His presence was a reminder of what family support was supposed to look like. Sarah's garden club friends had transformed the church fellowship hall into something beautiful. Linda Williams coordinated flower arrangements that reflected Sarah's love of bright colors and natural beauty. Margaret Thompson organized a reception menu featuring Sarah's favorite recipes, prepared by women who had shared countless potluck dinners with her over the years. My phone rang constantly with condolence calls, but Marcus's number never appeared on the screen. Former colleagues from the school district shared memories of Sarah's dedication to her students. Parents thanked me for the impact she had made on their children's lives. Everyone asked where Marcus was, and I found myself making excuses I didn't believe. Thursday morning arrived grey and cold, matching my emotional state perfectly. I dressed in the navy suit Sarah had bought me for our 30th wedding anniversary. The one she said brought out the blue in my eyes. Looking in our bedroom mirror, I saw a man who had aged decades in just 2 days. The funeral service was standing room only. Sarah's impact on our community was evident in every face that filled First Methodist Church. Her former students, now adults, sat beside current colleagues and long-time friends. The garden club occupied 2 entire pews wearing corsages made from Sarah's prize-winning roses. Pastor Williams delivered a beautiful eulogy that captured Sarah's spirit perfectly. He spoke about her gentle strength, her dedication to nurturing young minds, and her ability to find beauty in everyday moments. He mentioned her courage during illness and her peaceful acceptance of death. He did not mention Marcus. When it came time for family to speak, I walked to the pulpit on unsteady legs. Looking out at the sea of faces filled with love and respect for Sarah, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. I talked about our early years together, her joy at becoming a mother, and her pride in watching her students succeed. I thanked everyone for the support that had sustained us through difficult times. The most powerful moment came when several of Sarah's former students stood up spontaneously to share brief memories. A young woman named Jennifer talked about how Mrs. Sarah had encouraged her to pursue teaching despite family pressure to choose a more practical career. A man named David credited Sarah with helping him overcome a learning disability through patient after-school tutoring. At the graveside, as we lowered Sarah into the ground beside the headstone that would soon bear her name, I experienced a moment of absolute clarity. This community of friends and neighbors represented the family I actually had. These people had shown up when it mattered. They had honored Sarah's memory and supported me in ways my own son had refused to consider. The reception afterward felt like a celebration of Sarah's life, rather than just a somber gathering. People shared funny stories about her legendary stubbornness when it came to her garden, her terrible cooking experiments that occasionally produced something edible, and her uncanny ability to remember everyone's birthday. For the first time since her diagnosis, I found myself laughing genuinely. As the evening wound down and people began leaving, Tom pulled me aside. He had been watching me carefully all day, probably wondering when the shock would wear off and the real grief would hit. Instead, he saw something else beginning to emerge, a quiet determination that surprised us both. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Sarah would be proud too. You gave her the send-off she deserved." That night alone in our house for the first time, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. Marcus's betrayal during the worst moment of my existence had revealed something important I had been seeking love and validation from someone incapable of providing either. The family I thought I had built was based on my own wishful thinking rather than reality. But the day had also shown me something else. Real love and support had surrounded me in ways I hadn't fully appreciated before. The question now was what I would do with this painful but liberating knowledge. The first few weeks after Sarah's funeral passed in a strange combination of numbness and hyperactivity. I threw myself into tasks I had been avoiding for months, cleaning out closets, organizing paperwork, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. Each item told a story of our life together, and deciding what to keep versus donate became an exercise in determining which memories deserved space in my future. I found Sarah's journals while cleaning her desk, something I had never known she kept. Reading them was both heartbreaking and revelatory. She had documented not just her illness, but years of observations about our marriage and family. Her words revealed insights I had been too busy or too stubborn to see while she was alive. Sarah had written extensively about my workaholic tendencies and how they had affected our family dynamics. She understood why I worked such long hours, trying to provide security and opportunities we hadn't had growing up. But she also documented the cost-missed dinners, abbreviated conversations, and a gradual emotional distance that had developed between Marcus and me during his teenage years. One particular entry from 2 years earlier hit me like a physical blow. Darrel loves us completely, but he shows that love through providing rather than presence. Marcus has learned to equate love with absence, achievement with attention. I worry about what will happen to both of them when I'm no longer here to bridge that gap. Sarah had seen something I had missed entirely. While I was working to give Marcus every advantage I had, actually taught him that relationships were disposable, that career success mattered more than family connection. The phone call that had shattered my heart was actually the logical result of lessons I had inadvertently taught my son throughout his childhood. This recognition could have led to self-hatred and deeper despair. Instead, it sparked something unexpected, a determination to become the man Sarah had always seen potential for me to be. If I had contributed to Marcus's callousness through my own emotional unavailability, then I could choose to become someone different moving forward. The decision to sell my construction business came naturally. Jake, my longtime foreman, had been essentially running daily operations for months anyway. He had contacts who could secure financing, and the sale would provide me with financial security without the constant stress of managing crews and deadlines. Sarah had often suggested I pursue interests beyond construction, and now I had both the time and motivation to explore those possibilities. Enrolling in community college art classes felt terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. Sarah had always encouraged my sketching hobby, insisting I had talent that deserved development. The pottery wheel became a form of meditation, requiring complete presence and attention. For the first time in decades, I was learning something purely for the joy of learning, rather than practical application. The grief support group met Tuesday evenings at the community center. Initially, I attended reluctantly, assuming I would have nothing in common with other widows and widowers. Instead, I discovered a community of people navigating similar losses with varying degrees of success. Their stories helped normalize my own complicated feelings about loss, anger, and unexpected relief. Ellen Morrison had lost her husband of 29 years to a heart attack the previous spring. She was 62, a retired librarian with grown children who lived across the country. Her experience resonated with mine adult children, who offered sympathy but little practical support. Friends who gradually returned to their own lives and the challenge of rebuilding identity after decades of being half of a couple. Ellen and I began having coffee after group sessions, sharing stories about our marriages and tentatively exploring what life might look like moving forward. She understood the guilt associated with feeling relieved about certain aspects of widowhood, alongside genuine grief for what had been lost. Neither of us was looking for romance, but friendship with someone who truly understood felt precious. My phone continued to ring occasionally, with Marcus's number appearing on the screen. I let these calls go to voicemail, listening to increasingly desperate messages as weeks passed. His tone evolved from casual dismissal to concern, to what sounded like genuine panic as he realized I wasn't responding to any communication attempts. The messages revealed Marcus's growing awareness that something significant had changed. He mentioned calling the house repeatedly, driving past during a business trip to find it dark and apparently empty, and reaching out to neighbors who politely declined to provide information about my whereabouts. He seemed genuinely confused about why I had become unreachable. One particularly long voicemail arrived in early February, nearly 3 months after our devastating phone call. Marcus's voice carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard since his childhood. He talked about visiting Mom's grave, seeing the fresh headstone with her dates, and finally understanding that she had actually died. He apologized for his initial reaction and begged me to call him back so we could talk properly. But something fundamental had shifted inside me during those months of silence. Marcus's apology, while possibly sincere, came only after consequences had made themselves felt. He was sorry because his callousness had cost him something, not because he genuinely understood the pain he had caused. Real change requires recognition and growth that extends beyond regret about outcomes. My volunteer work at the homeless shelter introduced me to people whose stories put my own struggles in perspective. Men and women who had lost everything, but still maintained dignity and hope. Families separated by circumstances beyond their control. Veterans struggling with invisible wounds from service to country. These connections grounded me in purposes larger than my own healing. The art studio I rented in downtown Lancaster became my sanctuary. Teaching pottery to seniors provided structure and social connection while allowing me to develop skills Sarah had always insisted I possessed. My students, mostly women in their 70s and 80s, shared wisdom about resilience that couldn't be found in any self-help book. Their stories of overcoming loss and finding new purpose served as daily inspiration. 2 years after Sarah's death, my life had been completely transformed. The man who had once defined himself through work achievements and family obligations had evolved into someone guided by personal fulfillment and authentic relationships. The changes weren't just external. They reflected a fundamental shift in understanding what actually mattered. My relationship with Ellen had deepened into genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared experience. We maintained separate homes, but spent most evenings together, cooking simple meals and discussing books, art projects, and observations about rebuilding life after loss. Neither of us was trying to recreate previous marriages. Instead, we were exploring what love could look like when built on equality and choice rather than duty and tradition. The pottery studio had grown into a small business that provided both income and purpose. My work was featured in several local galleries, and the classes I taught had expanded to include veterans dealing with PTSD and teenagers from troubled backgrounds. Sarah would have been amazed to see the patient teacher I had become, qualities she had always insisted I possessed, but I had never believed about myself. My social circle consisted entirely of people who had proven themselves through actions rather than words. Ellen's friendship anchored me, but I had also developed meaningful connections with other grief group members, fellow artists and volunteers at the shelter. These relationships were based on showing up consistently rather than obligation or history. The house Sarah and I had shared for 30 years underwent gradual transformation as well. I kept her garden but simplified the maintenance, focusing on perennial flowers that returned each spring without requiring constant attention. The rooms she had decorated with careful attention to family photos and sentimental objects became spaces reflecting my current interests rather than our shared past. It was during this period of contentment that Marcus finally managed to reach me through an unexpected channel. A letter arrived at the art studio, addressed to me in handwriting I didn't immediately recognize. The return address showed a law firm in Manhattan, which initially made me think it concerned business matters related to Sarah's estate. Instead, the letter was from Marcus, written on his attorney friend's letterhead, in an apparent attempt to ensure I would open and read it. The 3-page document represented his most serious attempt at communication since that devastating phone call 2 years earlier. Marcus wrote about finding my studio through internet searches and persistence. He described visiting Lancaster multiple times, talking to neighbors and former colleagues, until someone mentioned my involvement with the art center. He acknowledged that I had been deliberately avoiding his calls and emails and expressed understanding about why this might be necessary. The letter contained the first genuine accountability I had ever seen from my son. He wrote specifically about the phone call that had ended our relationship, acknowledging the cruelty of his response and taking responsibility for choosing convenience over compassion. He didn't make excuses about work stress or miscommunication. He simply admitted that his behavior had been wrong. Most importantly, Marcus wrote about changes in his own life that suggested real growth rather than just regret about consequences. He had left his high-pressure consulting job to work for a non-profit organization focused on business development in underserved communities. He was in therapy, addressing patterns of emotional detachment that had affected not just our relationship, but his romantic partnerships as well. The letter concluded with a request for one conversation in whatever setting would make me most comfortable. Marcus wasn't asking for immediate forgiveness or restoration of our previous relationship. He simply wanted the opportunity to demonstrate through words and actions that he had become someone capable of respecting the grief he had dismissed so callously. I carried that letter around for weeks before deciding how to respond. Ellen encouraged me to consider the meeting, pointing out that healing sometimes required facing painful truths together. Tom, who had witnessed Marcus's absence during Sarah's funeral, was more skeptical about whether genuine change was possible. Ultimately, my decision came from a place of strength rather than neediness. I was no longer desperate for Marcus's love or approval. My life was full and meaningful without him. But Sarah had loved him completely, despite his flaws, and perhaps there was value in discovering whether the man he claimed to have become deserved a place in the life I had rebuilt. I agreed to meet Marcus at a coffee shop in downtown Columbus, neutral territory, that wouldn't carry emotional associations for either of us. I suggested a Saturday afternoon, giving us flexibility about how long the conversation might last. I made it clear that this meeting didn't guarantee anything beyond the chance to talk honestly about what had happened between us. The man who walked into that coffee shop barely resembled the son I remembered. Marcus had lost weight, his expensive suits replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. He looked older, more serious, but also somehow lighter than he had during his high-pressure career days. When he saw me, his face showed relief mixed with nervousness. We talked for 3 hours that day, covering ground that should have been explored years earlier. Marcus asked detailed questions about his mother's illness, expressing genuine remorse about missing those final months. He listened without defensiveness as I described the devastation of losing both my wife and son in the same week. He didn't try to justify his actions or minimize their impact. More importantly, Marcus demonstrated understanding about why rebuilding trust would require time and consistent action rather than words alone. He didn't ask for immediate restoration of our relationship or regular contact. He simply expressed hope that future interactions might be possible as I felt ready to explore them. That conversation marked the beginning of a very gradual reconnection based on realistic expectations and clear boundaries. Marcus understood that earning his way back into my life would require proving his reliability over time. He would need to demonstrate the emotional maturity and compassion that had been absent during our family's greatest crisis. The process took months of brief phone calls, occasional emails, and carefully planned visits. Marcus showed up consistently, respected my pace, and never pressured for more contact than I was comfortable providing. He shared details about his therapy work and career changes, allowing me to observe his growth rather than simply taking his word for transformation. Slowly, carefully, we began building a relationship based on who we actually were rather than who we had assumed each other to be. It wasn't the parent-child dynamic we had shared before Sarah's death. It was something more like friendship between adults who had learned painful lessons about love loss and the importance of showing up when it matters most. Our reconnection wasn't a fairy tale ending where everything returned to previous normalcy. Too much had been broken and rebuilt for that kind of simple resolution. Instead, it represented something perhaps more valuable proof that people can change, that relationships can be rebuilt on stronger foundations, and that sometimes the worst things that happen lead to outcomes we never could have imagined. Sarah's death had revealed the weakness in our family structure, but it had also provided opportunities for growth that might never have emerged otherwise. Marcus had been forced to confront his own emotional limitations and make genuine changes. I had discovered strength and independence I didn't know I possessed. We had both learned that love requires action, especially during difficult times. The man writing this story today bears little resemblance to the person who made that devastating phone call 2 years ago. I am someone who has learned to value authenticity over obligation, presence over providing, and quality relationships over quantity. I have built a life filled with purpose, creativity, and genuine connection. Sarah would be amazed by the man I became after losing her. She always believed I had capabilities beyond construction work and financial providing, but even she couldn't have predicted this complete transformation. Her death, as devastating as it was, became the catalyst for becoming someone I had never allowed myself to be during our marriage. The greatest lesson from this journey is that sometimes the most painful experiences reveal truths that can set us free. Marcus's cruelty during my darkest hour showed me that I had been seeking love and approval from someone incapable of providing either. But it also forced me to discover that I could create a meaningful life without that validation. I learned that family isn't determined by blood relationships alone. The people who showed up during Sarah's funeral, who supported me through early grief, and who continue to enrich my daily life represent my real family. Some of them I had known for decades, others I met during my healing process. What matters isn't history, but reliability. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that setting boundaries and requiring respect doesn't make someone selfish or cruel. For too many years, I had accepted treatment from Marcus that I would never have tolerated from anyone else simply because he was my son. Learning to demand basic human decency in all my relationships transformed not just our dynamic, but every aspect of my social life. The phone call that destroyed my assumptions about family love also freed me to build something authentic and sustainable. Marcus's cruel dismissal of his mother's death forced both of us to grow in ways that have ultimately strengthened our relationship. We may never be as close as we once were, but what we have now is based on truth rather than wishful thinking. Sometimes the worst thing that happens becomes the best thing that could have happened. Sarah's death was a tragedy that will always carry deep sadness. But it also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed, and forced changes that have created a richer, more authentic life than I had before. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope it resonates with something in your own experience. Have you ever had someone close to you show their true character during a crisis? How did you handle discovering that people you trusted weren't who you thought they were? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please take a moment to like this video. If my story touched your heart, and subscribe for more real-life experiences about overcoming betrayal and building resilience. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to rebuild after devastating loss. Sometimes our stories can help others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening with such patience and compassion. I hope you find the courage to demand the love and respect you deserve, and the strength to build beautiful new chapters when old ones come to unexpected ends. Life has a way of surprising us sometimes in the most wonderful ways, even after the deepest pain.